I see a lot of familiar faces that were here last night, but I also just thought it might be great to kick off with just framing the mission and the vision for the Great Rivers Biennial before we launch into a conversation. So Great Rivers was established in 2003 as a partnership with the Gateway Foundation. And so the exhibition you see on view today is the fifth iteration of this collaborative partnership. And the mission of the Great Rivers Biennial is really to identify talented, emerging and mid-career artists that are living and working here in the St. Louis metropolitan area. And the artists that are selected are chosen by an outside jury that we at CAM invite in to jury a submission, an open submission process. And those jurors for this year's exhibition are Lisa Doran, who's the Associate Curator of Contemporary Art at the Art Institute of Chicago, Jeffrey Grove, who's the Hoffman Family Senior Curator of Contemporary Art at the Dallas Museum of Art, and Lydia Yee, who's a curator at the Barbican Art Gallery in London. And together, those three curators selected the artists that you see here on the panel today, and after they were selected, we awarded them an honorarium of $20,000 to mount a major exhibition here at the museum. So not only is the Great Rivers Biennial dedicated to supporting and celebrating artists working here in our community, but it also prompts artists to reconsider their practice and mount it on a larger scale that they've never worked before. And as you can see here, the results today, it really is truly astounding. So I'm going to introduce our artists, and then we're going to have a conversation, and then we'll open up the panel to questions from you. So David Johnson, here to my left, he's an artist and educator based here in St. Louis. He received his MFA in visual art from Washington University in 2007, and he earned his BFA in studio art with an emphasis in photography from Texas Christian University in 2005. Currently, David is an adjunct lecturer at St. Louis University, and he's also a founding member of the Rad Lab studio space downtown. His photographs have been exhibited nationally, including, well, here in St. Louis at the Kemper Art Museum, Los Caminos and Boots Contemporary Art Space, La Esquina in Kansas City, New Space Center for Photography in Portland, Oregon, and MAPS Contemporary Art Space in Belleville. Asma Kazmi, sitting to the left of David, was born and raised in Karachi, Pakistan, and she's also is currently based here. She received her MFA in sculpture from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2007, and her BFA in sculpture and film and video from the Massachusetts College of Art in 2002. She is a part-time lecturer at the Kansas City Art Institute, and she is the recipient of many awards, among them the Rocket Grant from the Charlotte Street Foundation and the Spencer Museum of Art at Kansas University, the At the Edge Innovative Art in Chicago Award from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and the Creative Stimulus Award here in St. Louis from the Critical Mass for the Visual Arts. Asma's work has been exhibited all over the country, including at H&R Block Space and Grand Arts in Kansas City, the University of Missouri and Boots Contemporary Art Space, both here in St. Louis, the Guild Gallery in New York, Gallery Saint-Titre in Brussels, in Belgium, Gallery 400 at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and the Boston Underground Film Festival and the Mass Art Film Society, both in Boston. And Mel Trad, who's a St. Louis native, studied sculpture and photography at the University of Southern California, and she received her BA of Fine Arts in 2009. Mel's presented her work at Fort Gondo Compound for the Arts, Pig Slop, and 1948 Cherokee, all here in St. Louis, and at Under the Bridge Gallery and H. Kazan Gallery in Los Angeles. So in terms of their different practices that you see here on view in the exhibition, each created a new body of work specifically for the show. David's photographs are organized under the title Institutional Etiquette and Strange Overtones. Asma's exhibition is titled Between Word and Image, which is in this gallery here, and Mel's show is self-titled. And we're actually sitting in the midst of her installation here in the performance space today. So without further ado, I'm going to ask them some questions, and we'll go from there. So this is the question, my first question is for each of you. I'm curious to hear from you about how you arrived at your idea for your Great Rivers Biennial project, and if each of you can then sketch out your exhibition in broad terms, in terms of what we're seeing on view here in the museum. Yeah.
I'll go first. Well, in grad school, I started coming up and dealing with kind of the notion of how personality and architecture kind of interweave. Does architecture kind of manipulate personality, or does or vice versa. And so I started photographing and kind of dealing with office culture, partly because I was really interested in the series The Office, but also the economy was kind of slipping down and seeing kind of like how that worked. And really kind of photographing kind of this cubicle culture and seeing where kind of, you know, the chair rubbing against the wall for years or the misplaced pencil sharpener felt like those were achievements over kind of this space that seemed a little bit monotonous and kind of overwhelming to me. So I ended up photographing offices for like 2 years, and it turned into this like job almost, you know, wearing a suit, going in and kind of convincing people to let me photograph their institution or their space. So then I kind of realized I need a little bit more lax procedure and performance. So I started photographing friends' homes and kind of using the way that they arrange their spaces. I'm kind of a nosy person, so every time I go to somebody's house, I look at the fridge, look at the bookshelf, you know, go into rooms and see. I think it's fascinating how people kind of arrange their spaces and what they choose to show and what they don't show. And so kind of developing that working method of dealing with kind of interior architecture, moved to, I had a show at Boots Contemporary Art Space, and Juan had asked me to kind of deal with the gallery, which was a new kind of space to deal with, and as an artist kind of dealing with the idea of how do I deal with these white blank walls, like that's kind of, you know, anxiety ridden. So I ended up using my camera and turning directly and photographing the walls at different times of day. So lighting became really important and kind of subtleties of the gallery space. And then as, you know, every 2 years, as any local artist knows, the Great Rivers comes up, and trying to, you know, deal with a full page proposal, I kind of was like, well, I'm interested in all these spaces, why not use the institution and of CAM and kind of frame it all perfectly, or maybe not perfectly, it's not the best word, but frame it and kind of bring up questions and bring up notions that people maybe not normally address when they go to a museum. So it became this idea of this kind of tripod, if you will, of the formal spaces of the museum, the gallery itself, the functional spaces, the offices behind the scenes as the installation goes, and then more of the like foundational support of the donors' homes, and kind of playing around with that notion of, you know, what exhibition space versus private space versus workspace, and almost trying to blur those lines and really show that like a lot of personal homes are this kind of exhibition space. A lot of people use their home as like their own kind of curatorial project, but also in the way that somebody arranges flowers on their desk in their office. Like there's all this kind of, everything gets a little bit muddled and confused, and I really like that idea that, you know, all these spaces serve several different purposes, and really asking the viewer to come in and, you know, do we really, when we go to a museum and look at a painting, do we actually consider the wall that the painting's on? Do we go to a hospital and realize that this is run by a board of directors? So bringing in those kind of conversations of, you know, realizing the institution's a lot bigger than just the art on the wall. So that's kind of how I navigated.
Yeah. Thanks, David. So Asma, tell us a little bit about your idea or how you came to it.
Yeah, so I guess, is this a good distance?
Maybe a little closer.
Okay. So the current work that you see in that gallery, Between Word and Image, it came out of a project that I'm still working on, which is called Playing Gender. And Playing Gender is a project that I've been working on for maybe 3 years now, and it started in India, where I was doing this performance activity with 4 transgendered hijras, they're called, you know, the project Playing Gender is very much about highlighting the disenfranchised hijra identity, but it's also about my own self-conscious insertion in that environment. And one of the hijras who I was working with, Mangla, she was very interested in my experience of giving birth, and she would constantly ask me to describe that experience to her. And one day she handed me a piece of paper, a gift, and she said that this was her experience of giving birth, that she had written it down. So Mangla she's a biological man, and she's also illiterate. And so this piece of paper was just really fascinating to me because it contained these kinds of marks that imitated the Arabic script, but they really only held meaning for her and for me because I was told the story orally by her. So I was really fascinated by this piece of paper, this kind of sharing of secrets in this way, but also, what those marks were. They sort of lingered between being text and image, and they held meaning, but if you just looked at them, they were sort of nothing or gibberish, and so. I guess a couple of years later, I decided that what I wanted to do was to, I'd come back to St. Louis and I was working here, and I decided that I wanted to work with some illiterate adults in St. Louis and engage them in the process of writing and drawing. And so the drawings on the wall that you see in the gallery space are a continuous interaction that we had for about 5 months, I think. There's some video footage of the participants in the process of writing. If you guys were here last night, the drawers were actually here, present in the space, and there's a table in the gallery which invites the audience to take a moment and sit down and write something. There's the table is two-tiered, and so the top tier of the table is supposed to keep you from seeing what you're writing, and the idea behind that was to recreate that experience of disorientation that I experienced when Mangla handed me this drawing. To recreate that experience for the audience in a more direct way. So I hope you guys will take a moment and sit down and write something when this is done, or at some other time during the exhibit. So, yeah.
Thanks, Asma. Mel, tell us a little bit about your Great Rivers project.
All right. Broadly, the sculptures arranged in the space articulate how meaning is manifested through form, material, and they investigate how we communicate meaning as bodies and as humans through different ways and in the traditions of painting and sculpture in the 20th and 21st century. This installation in particular and the one in the gallery focus on painting and sculpture and kind of break it down into how we view art objects.
And Mel, your practice is very site-specific in the sense that the work that you create, your sculptures, your paintings, your installations, very much respond to their environment. So can you talk a little bit about the installation here in the performance space and where you found inspiration for the arrangement that we see and also the works that you produce specifically for this space?
Sure. I'm very much inspired by this space because it's so much like an arena and it's used for lots of different things. Parties, concerts, panel discussions. So what first came to mind is that I wanted to work with fabric in a way and maybe hang some flags or do something with banners. So that was my entry point into working here. And I've created Untitled Triptych and a Half, which are these 3 faded banners. These point to how we have used fabric as tapestries, as flags, as different kind of ways to communicate meaning visually, but also everything is like counterbalanced with different works in the space. The Black Mirror speaks about pedestals. Pedestals used to elevate otherwise modest forms to eye level. But here it's mirrored and black, and nothing is nothing's displayed. So that one especially points to how the viewer activates work.
You know, what I think is really interesting is that these three artists were announced in September 2011 as being chosen for this year's Great Rivers Biennial. And so we've been working together since last fall to develop the ideas for your exhibitions. And what I think is a really a nice tie-in amongst your three practices is that your ideas have really evolved from what you originally were thinking about doing to what we see now in the galleries today. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about your process and how your ideas have evolved and what was surprising about that experience for you and what you kind of learned from that as well. And maybe we'll start with Asma just to mix things up.
Yeah, I mean, so I've actually, I've been working on the project between word and image for about a year now, and I've worked with a couple of other people in Kansas City, and I think when I started the project, I had sort of a naive understanding of what it meant to be illiterate, and a lot of what I was thinking was based on my familiarity with Mangla's specific kind of illiteracy and her specific kind of experience. So when I started working with people here, I very soon began to realize that people function in different ways, and the people I was working with here some had held jobs. The three people that I worked in St. Louis with, they can read and write to some extent, and so that was sort of a challenge for me to try to understand, what it is that I'm trying to accomplish, and how do I sort of detach it from this one drawing that I've held on to, and how do I move the work forward based on what my participants already know, and so a big part of the drawings that we created are not displayed in that gallery, and some of those were actual writings that Larry, Nicole, and John produced, and those writings were very self-conscious. Even the process of writing them, we used to sit in a room and watch artwork or read poetry together, and either generate texts based on what I had shown them that day, or write out personal narratives. And so, if you look at those early writings that they produced, they're very self-conscious, and they kept asking me in the process of writing to give them different spellings for words, and there was a weird tension there. I kind of resisted doing that, and so finally, I decided that what we wanted to do was to do this more of a gestural exercise, which then became very meditative and not as self-conscious, so that's sort of how I was able to reconcile those ideas of what, or that how that the project could be realized in the way that you see it now. So that's one main thing, I think.
What's interesting too, Asma, I think, is that your originating inspiration for this project was a gift that you were given, that you then, it became almost a hypothesis that you tried to enact with these participants, but then it led to its own set of surprises or evolutions within the work itself. And I think that's a testament to the sophistication of the idea too. I think this is true for all the artists that are participating in this biennial, is that, you have an original idea of what you might want to do, but then it gathers legs and takes off in its own direction. And David, I think this was certainly the case for you as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I didn't even know if I was going to be able to get away with it. Like, our first meeting with Kelly and Dominic in my studio, you know, the award had been won, and a couple weeks later we sat down, and kind of there was a conversation like, can I even get into like the donors' homes or the board members' homes? And luckily enough, 11 families opened their home to me, and a few more also said yes, but scheduling kind of got a little bit out of hand. You know, so I had the idea of these kind of 3 places in mind, but I had no idea how it was going to turn out. And the biggest kind of thing for me was, you know, photographing in offices, you're kind of distant. But, you know, the board members' homes I photographed, they were very kind of diverse settings, anywhere from like a 1920s kind of ranch-style home to really contemporary architecture. And the collections that they have are very kind of very diverse as well, and realizing as I was photographing, because I was coming to the museum and had started the process of photographing in the museum, which was pretty much the museum opened their doors and they're like, whenever you want to come in, come on in. And you know, Kelly stayed late one night and let me photograph for a while, and then coming in early, which is not a normal practice for me to photograph early in the morning, but the lighting in here is really amazing before they open the doors. But going into the board members' homes and realizing like I'm using a large format camera, so it's taking a while to set up images, but also moving through these spaces and realizing how much these spaces dictated how they were going to be photographed. I didn't expect that. I thought I would just come in and kind of do my thing and move out, but it was very much navigating these spaces became very much, you know, certain spaces definitely changed the way that I was photographing, and that was really unexpectable. And then I was just really, you know, kind of granted the gift of being able to occupy these spaces and, you know, seeing really great collections and really great ways that people can organize their spaces, and that really dictated the way I was going to photograph. I knew that I was going to photograph these 3 spaces, but I didn't know how they were going to turn out, and I really, to my surprise, the blurring and kind of missing the context of where a home turns into exhibition space and an office turns into a home space and the gallery space turns into this other kind of fluctuating identity, and like really realizing that, like, you know, studying the museum, I think I've stared at the walls more than most anybody, like, you know, getting to know cracks, and like I love the fact that this museum, it's a beautiful building, but it still has cracks, and I think that speaks to kind of all architecture and the fact that it's, you know, not only does personnel change in the museum, but the artwork changes, but also the museum's this kind of evolving creature too. So those were all kind of little unexpected things as the kind of process went on.
And do you want to talk, your ideas for how you wanted to install the work also changed? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I guess in some sort of way you could say that my work has been married to the grid for years and years and years. I've always shown my work in kind of a grid form. And the work started having conversations with each other, and the fact that, you know, I proposed the idea that there's 3 separate grids, one kind of donor grid, one office grid, and one kind of formal space grid. But I realized the lines were getting completely blurred, that a grid wouldn't be appropriate. And plus I had to deal with a really gigantic wall, which is a little nerve-wracking. And then I thought about, well, what if I put them on like the normal horizon line, everything at the same level? That would include a narrative that I didn't really want to exist. And so I kind of used these, if I will, Tetris shapes to deal with these kind of, this tonal range. And as I was editing, I shot over 500 images with my large format camera, and so editing them all and kind of moving through them, it turned into a conversation of almost building lyrics or building up, kind of writing a song, and having like kind of these bass notes of the museum and these more kind of high notes of personality of the donors' homes, and trying to fluctuate through that kind of idea of like song or lyrical impressions, and kind of moving up and down and making it to where it wasn't all exactly the same image, but all very based together. So kind of dealing with the space, and then, you know, I think I posed the idea to Kelly and Dominic, and they both were like, yeah, this is a good way to resolve it, and kind of getting away from that grid was a really kind of a needed idea too, I guess.
Yeah, I think this idea of breaking things or an idea or an institution down into its component elements and then bringing them back together is actually also a very compelling connection amongst your 3 practices too, because David, with your photographic series, trying to isolate these different aspects of CAM from the galleries and offices to our patrons' homes. But then, you know, in the installation, they're all wedded back together because indeed all of these relationships are quite fluid. And Mel, I would love to hear you talk some more about your process. We've had some great conversations in which you've kind of explained how a work is made, and as a sculptor, I think that's paramount. So could you share a little bit with our audience about your process?
Sure. I collect objects from all different places. I frequent a junkyard in South City and collect materials from architectural salvage yards, as well as a lot of natural objects. And I've recently started fabricating some things as well. In the studio, I kind of lay everything out in very methodical process, kind of indexical. So I begin to just look at the materials in a very objective way, remove them from whatever they were previously used for, and kind of break them down based on formal qualities and color, texture, age, mass, all of these different things. Mm-hmm. From there, I play with the materials and do a lot of trial and error experimentations until something arises, or it's very intuitive and what I call a productive tension. So from there, lots of things can happen and a variety of different forms.
Building off of that, another compelling link between all three of your projects for the biennial is that while your conceptual ideas are originating from really different places, and the final installation also is quite unique from each other, you're also you're all starting with the city of St. Louis as the base inspiration for your ideas. It's architecture, the people who live here, the stuff you find in and around town. It's all part of your source material. And I think that's a really nice poetic connection to the premise of the biennial itself, which is to celebrate and support artists working here in the region. So I was hoping you could that each of you could talk about your relationship to the city and how it's informed your practice.
This is a great city to make art in. It's affordable. You can have studio space. You can have apartment. You don't have to live in a closet and work 80 hours to pay rent. So that's kind of the start. And I guess when I moved to St. Louis 7 years ago, maybe the first night that I went out and I went to a sports bar, and some guy's like, "You come in here for grad school for art? Like, why would we don't have culture? All we have is beer and baseball." And that's so not true. There's every corner of this town has such great culture and such diversity, and again, it's affordable. But I think a lot of, and we have this great, a lot of my friends have stayed in St. Louis to be part of this community, but also this prize is a kind of to win the GRB. It's a start off to kind of build off thing, and a lot of people realize that, and a lot of people stay in town because they want to be part of such a great prize. I haven't heard of any museum that does something quite like this. And I guess for me, a lot of times when I talk about winning this award, it's all about the community and the friends. I wouldn't be the artist that I am today without conversations at bars or coming to museums and coming to openings and doing the thing and having those conversations. A lot of times, I think a lot of friends of mine have had conversations of art's this thing that we do, but it's the residue that really makes it work. And I think St. Louis is a really powerful town because it's everything's accessible. Curators are accessible, museums are accessible, galleries are accessible, other artists are accessible, and we're not New York and we're not Chicago, but we are St. Louis, and having that mentality is really great. And I think it makes it, it's a place that you can thrive within kind of a small sphere, even though if it's just about beer and baseball, we can have a great museum and a great institution and several great things. So I'd say that I guess my biggest influence in the city is just the people that make it up and celebrate each other.
And the architecture.
And
right?
the architecture, the beautiful, beautiful buildings you know, I grew up in Texas, so parts of Texas, like, we don't have that rich history of red brick buildings, and I think when I moved up here, I was just amazed of you know, the historical architecture.
So, you know, I've been in St. Louis for about over 5 years, and my relationship with the city has been sort of partial, I would say. I've been teaching in different cities, and so for the past 2 years, I've been living in Kansas City and St. Louis, and before that, it was Chicago and St. Louis, and so I feel like you know, one of the things that I've learned through my art making process is that the work that I do really facilitates a kind of you know, sense of grounding in the place that I'm in at the moment, and so I think that you know, this project Between Word and Image really gave me you know, some kind of an intimacy with St. Louis and with the adult literacy program and the St. Louis public school system, and so that's yeah. So I think that my work sort of helps make that connection and my sort of existence here more real. So yeah, I think and you know, a lot of my work sort of, it happens in different cities. You know, sometimes in Pakistan and sometimes in India, and then so I'm always thinking about the idea of how can one make work in different places but make it relevant, you know, across cultures, and so you know, being here and having these conversations and showing work really helps. And you know, I totally agree with David. It's a beautiful city, and with lots of great opportunities and resources for working artists. It's a good place to live and make work, I think. So yeah.
And you all have really fabulous studios too, living here.
Yes, I have. I think I'll never have such a beautiful studio anywhere else. Sort of, yeah.
And Mel?
My experience of St. Louis is in two parts. I grew up here, and then I returned after going to school in California. But both as a child and an adult, I have felt a real earthiness to St. Louis, and it's kind of wild in a lot of ways that has been retained. And what I mean is that there's subtleties to the weather. You know, the storms can come in a couple of hours, and I feel like that as a child growing up in a place like this, especially when we have wildly hot summers and very cool winters, affected my connection, I guess more in a romantic way, to how I experienced everyday life. So there's that, and there's also that St. Louis has a real history. So I feel like I can draw on all kinds of different elements here. There's a lot of post-industrial emptiness. I work in, or my studio is in the Lemp Brewery, which is a crazy place. And, you know, so it's rich with a lot of strange and kind of beautiful experiences at the same time. There's a lot going on, both positive and negative. And I think is rich in lots of different experiences that you learn from on lots of different levels. I guess I'm talking very broadly. From like the personal to more like aesthetic, the bricks, and also like the old Lemp Brewery. And I've learned a lot about industry coming back, and just watching an American city rise and then fall and then rise again. We'll see.
Well, and then you're literally incorporating the foundations of St. Louis in your work by reconstituting these discarded materials.
Right. So much of St. Louis, I feel like I'm living in the aftermath of some big cultural explosion. Lots of production here. That's still going on, but so I definitely draw on that. It's kind of a moody feeling.
Yeah. So I have one more question for each of you, and then we'll open it up to the audience. And just to kind of sum it up, I would love to hear from you what you're hoping that viewers take away from each of your projects installed here at the museum.
Having this kind of notion of like slowing down and looking. As a photographer, I had this practice of like, I just look at things, and sometimes I look at things, and sometimes I'm looking at things and I'm watching the movie in my head, like daydreaming style. But there's a familiarity with all these photographs, even if like, you may not be invited to a specific home or know the office of the museum. There's a familiarity within everything. So, I think some people are like, oh, that looks like grandma's house, even though like they've never been to that place, or like, oh, that looks like my office, even though they've never been in the office of the museum. So really one thing is like, just slowing down and people kind of understanding how they move through their own spaces. I think we're kind of distracted by, glowing screens all the time, that, there's something really beautiful of like, I'm looking right now at like the reflection of the crack on the floor, and I think there's something kind of amazing about that moment right there. And, maybe if, maybe a lesson of looking and having somebody kind of see their space in a different new way. It would be my biggest hope, of somebody slowing down and kind of taking in just how visually like interesting things can be. I guess that would be my biggest hope.
Thanks.
So, I'm interested in this idea of liminality, which is sort of a place in between two places. It's it's this experience that you feel when you catch your reflection in a reflective surface, and you don't recognize yourself. And in that moment, you're sort of a stranger to yourself. And it's a place where you are able to maybe be aware of more than one reality, and it's also a place of disorientation. And for me, the drawings sort of are in that place where they challenge our notion of what it means to be able to read and write, to be literate. They're in this place where you can look at familiar images or pictures or forms, but there's an inability to decipher any kind of meaning into that structure. And so I think similar to what I think David wishes to accomplish, I want you to look at these drawings and maybe get a sense of what I felt when Mangla handed me that piece of paper, that kind of fascination and disorientation, this kind of a liminal space, if you will. So that's my hope.
My work is I would like for the viewer to experience kind of a breakdown and then a rebuilding of ideas, and the internal experience we have of internalizing what we see. And so basically with the work, I want the viewer simply to take it in and be able to see him or herself from the outside into how we use materials and forms to assert meaning.
Thanks, Mel. So now, does anyone have a question for our artists that they'd like to ask? Paraphrase. So Leslie's asking if David has been using his 4x5 format camera if that was engaged specifically for this exhibition, or if this has been a part of his ongoing practice. And also, she's asking about the scale of the photographs, because they're not overwhelming in size, but they are large enough to instill an embodied experience with the work in terms of how it's installed.
Right. So I've been using a 4x5 camera, since undergrad.
Can you talk a little bit, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can you talk a little bit about what a 4x5 camera does?
Okay, so typically, I'm still using film. I know we've moved on to digital world and whatnot. I still use a digital camera for other projects, but more for when I'm dealing with as architecture. The 4x5 camera, it's actually a field 4x5 camera, so it looks like a wooden box. You pop it open, and it's got a bellows, so the shutter speed, and I'm a photography lecturer, so I might get a little technical here, but the f-stop and the shutter speed are on the front of the lens, and then and behind the camera, you have multiple ways of dealing with focus. There's tilts and shifts, and you can kind of move the camera around, so the artist has a little bit more choice than just the focus ring that you would find on like a digital SLR camera. I find it really important to use that camera because it slows me down. If I'm using a digital camera, I can make 200 images in 20 minutes and miss something. When I'm using a 4x5 camera, I have limited resources. I can only shoot one sheet of film at a time. I have to move through the space very specifically. When I was photographing donors' homes, I didn't want to outstay my welcome, so I had 3 to 4 hours planned out to where I knew I could only shoot maybe 20 images and get in and get out. But it takes me about 20 minutes to set up one image. So it becomes a lot more thoughtful in resolving compositions and dealing with lighting. And I find that I'm slowing down and looking at the space a lot more while using the 4x5 camera, because it is it costs me about $12 per shot just to develop.
And also, the image in the camera is reversed and upside down.
So when I'm looking through my camera, I have the whole dance of I have a big hood that I have to stand behind my camera, a dark cloth, but the camera is upside down and inverted. So I think a lot of people really compliment me on my composition, but that's because I'm looking at things upside down. Much like when I took a painting class, or my mom teaches painting, she always tells her students, flip it upside down and take a look at it. So I'm kind of looking at the world upside down all the time. But with the scale of the photographs, that was a very precise kind of thinking. I feel like right now it's kind of really chic to have huge images, photographs that kind of compete with the whole space, or ask the viewer to kind of participate within the image. It becomes this very narrative. It references, very large scale paintings. And I like the closeness, because some of these images are really familiar. I don't want it to be an alienating thing for the viewer to where they feel overwhelmed. I want them to, that scale is very specific, that height was very specific to where people can get close, and it becomes a very personal relationship between the viewer, to where you can get close. You don't have to back up all the way across the museum to see it. But in the same way, it's a scale enough to where I can have multiple images. It's very important to have 35 images in the show, because I wanted it not to be about one image, but about this kind of body of work. So, and also the way they're not small enough to where you need them all together, but you can back up and you can see, and there's, each image has a brother and sister to it. So it's very much having that scale. It's a little bit more personal, I think. I hope that answers your question.
So she's asking about historical influences and inspirations for the artists, and also where they see their work going contextually.
I think I draw a lot from, sort of this kind of interpersonal, relational, post-object-centric trend of art making, where, interpersonal relationships are developed to create, an art form that has, for me, I'm also an educator, and I'm interested in pedagogy, and I'm interested in creating spaces of teaching and learning, and and I guess to answer the latter part of the question, where do I see my work going? I'm not sure. I mean, I think the current project that's up, I would like to create a book form for it, so something that can be published and be, I don't know, sort of mass produced, but also a form that incorporates theory, but also creative writing, as well as the writings that, these kinds of writings that are up on the wall. So not really sure what that's going to be, but I think I see that as sort of the another iteration of the current project. I have sort of other impulses too. I'm interested in experimental documentary work, and so hopefully, I don't know, I'll be doing some of that in the next few years. So yeah, I think that's it.
I have, I guess, two divergent influences that ultimately come together. I'm very much influenced by Hellenistic sculpture, bodies carved out of stone, and am really interested in how, like, we as humans and as a culture across time have been looking at the nude body. So there's that. I look at a lot of, that's really what this one's doing, Untitled Reclining Nude. And then I'm also very much influenced by a lot of minimalist artists, and Donald Judd for sure. And I look a lot at Rosemary Trockle and how she deals with gender. So I look at a lot of different things and kind of piece my practice together, and based upon my impulses and how I learn from what other artists are doing.
Now, where would you like to see your work going is the other part of that question.
Oh, right. I would like to see my work more in terms of what's happening in the performance space, pushing towards an environment, playing with the architecture of a space, and creating works that respond to one another, and creating a dynamic.
I think my work is in direct conversation with like Louise Lawler or Candida Hofer, who are dealing with institutions and also collections. Big influences, the new topographic photographers and how they dealt with kind of landscape and kind of man-made landscape. For a while, I joked around that my office series was like the 11th floor topographics. I'm a huge nerd for Jacques Tati films and the way that he has his characters move through space, which I'll actually, for my public programming on June 23rd, will be showing Playtime, Jacques Tati's 1967 film, with a live jazz band improving the soundtrack. So if y'all are free that night, it's going to be a cool event.
Outside on the building, too,
yeah.
So projecting this film about architecture on our architecture.
And then Gordon Maida Clark kind of blew my mind when I first kind of studied his work and the way he was manipulating the various architectures. As far as where I'd see myself going, it'd be great to work with another museum outside of St. Louis, but I'm also very interested in maybe using a different institution, maybe not just the museum, but kind of maybe open, because I feel like, working with the museum, it's kind of a specific audience, to where if I worked with a different institution, making a little bit larger audience, it'd be interesting to like go into like, I don't know, a hospital and see how the work turns out, or, another institution that people have, their own kind of ideals about, and seeing if we can push those notions around a little bit. What is art? Wow. I think, that's the motivating force with my studio is, Can I get away with photographing a museum and its board members in its office and try to come up with some sort of dialogue, something that's interesting, something that's motivating for not only me but viewers. And I teach Photo 1 courses to students that aren't art majors. So that question of like, well, what makes it good, what makes it bad, and like, there's a lot of technical stuff involved with a Photo 1 course, but also, you know, I kind of talk about to my students as like, either photograph something that pisses you off or gets you off, and then we can move on from that. Don't photograph your feet and don't photograph dogs or rainbows. But, you know, photograph something that like really pisses you off or gets you off, and then that conversation bridges because you get passionate about it. And I think, you know, what is art? I think it's anything that people can be passionate about. I cook. I think cooking is an art, and, you know, I'm listen to as much live music as possible and seeing people react to that. I think it's, you know, I think there's a lot of art in everyday experiences too. And, you know, for me, making decisions, there's a lot of intuition. I think, you know, going to school and learning how, you know, being very articulate with myself. Like I have, you know, making that choice. It was really hard, you know, going from 500 images to going to 60, and that 60, that 45, the last 10 images, that it was painful to pull out to make it the 35. But it's also like seeing where the work would feed off each other and what was working to make sure the conversation was a little bit clear with the work and in my own head. Hopefully that answers your question for me.
Yeah, I think I'm interested in asking that question, and I think to some extent that my current project, you know, might be a reasonable example of talking about that. You know, the drawings are not done by me; they're done by non-artists. My name is plastered all over the wall, and you know, this question was raised by the participants. You know, why are their works here? Why are they being shown at the Contemporary Art Museum? And so, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a very complicated question. It's a very political question. You know, it also depends on who you ask. So I don't know. I mean, I don't feel like I have an adequate answer, but I guess I can just speak for I don't know, the current project that's up, and some of the motivations behind it, and how they perhaps address you know, your question in some ways. So.
I don't think there's an answer to your question, but I am motivated by a similar question myself. And I think it's important to ask ourselves and each other. And that's also why we're here, is to put in question what we think is precious and how we value things and how we value material and value form and ideas. So that's my answer.
Well, thanks to all of you for coming today, and for our wonderful artists for sharing with us some insights into their practice and their projects for the Great Rivers Biennial. Thank you so much.
Thank you.